work, but they're not encumbered by religious dogma. And the religious dogma, I think we should remind ourselves, actually has a consequence in that context. I mean, we have Christian ministers preaching about the sinfulness of condom use in AIDS-riddled corners of the earth, where people are being literally decimated by AIDS, and they're being told that condoms are a bad thing. I mean, this is, as I argue in my book, genocidal stupidity. They're also being told that it's important to believe in the unique divinity of Christ in areas of the world where civil war between Christians and Muslims, I mean, religious war, has killed millions. And this is also genocidal stupidity to be arguing the belief system of Christianity is important in that context. And so it's something that if you go over there simply to help victims of famine and disease, you can simply go help them, and you don't need to spread ignorance and death in this way.
I want to switch gears a little, Sam. At one point in Letter to a Christian Nation, you seem to actually argue that the non-believer in America, the atheist, the agnostic, the secular humanist, the nullifidian, whatever term you want to use, well, that the atheist is a beleaguered minority, that skeptics are excluded and marginalized just because they don't share the dominant kind of superstitious worldview. That sounds a little like fundamentalists like Pastor John Hagee and so many others who argue that America is rampant with anti-Christian bigotry. So here's a question. Isn't it overstating it a bit to think that atheists and secularists are a beleaguered minority? It's not illegal to be stupid in America. You said that. It's also not illegal to be an atheist, even smart and an atheist in America.
Yeah, well, we're not a beleaguered minority in the sense that anyone is persecuting us or even spending much time thinking about us, because we are such a minority that we really do not show up in the national conversation. It's not like the Democrats are avowed atheists.
Contrary to what Ann Coulter says about Democrats and atheists.
Yeah, we might doubt how genuine the religious convictions are of some Democrats. It was embarrassing to everyone, I think, that John Kerry kept pulling out his Bible and insisting that he always kept it at the ready. And when Howard Dean tried to do it, it was genuinely laughable. But the truth is that most Democrats believe in God, and so our political discourse is not one that is at all driven by atheism or even cognizant of the real possibility of atheism, by and large. But the reality is, as attested to by many polls, is that atheists are the most reviled minority in this country. I mean, an atheist is someone who, by definition, cannot get elected to high office, given the poll results. I mean, given the fact that more than 50% of Americans say that they would refuse to vote for an atheist even if he were a qualified member of their own political party. I mean, this is a result that does not exist for any other variable that has been polled. I mean, they do not say this about homosexuals. They do not say this about Muslims. I mean, we have Muslims flying planes into our buildings and blowing themselves up on a daily basis in Iraq, and people are more concerned about atheists in this country. And so it's a shocking result. There also another poll that was also cited in my book is that when asked who would they least want their child to marry, an atheist, a Muslim, a Republican, I mean, whatever the variables were, atheism was the most stigmatized identity. And so there are many reasons for this. I mean, people have in their heads this idea that atheism is what brought us Stalinism, and it's what brought us Nazism and fascism generally, and I mean, this is also something I argue against in my book. I mean, this is just bad history. Atheism was not the source of any of these movements, and these movements were not rational movements. These were not instances in which people were demanding too much evidence for their worldview. These were essentially political religions. But people believe this stuff, and I can't tell you how many times I have heard that atheism is responsible for the greatest crimes of the 20th century. It's just simply not so, but it hasn't prevented religious people from spreading this meme far and wide in our society.
You're talking about bad history might be a function of bad education. You say near the end of your book that in one way, Letter to a Christian Nation is the product of a failure, a product of the failure of our educational system, of our schools, to announce the death of God, your words, in a way that each generation can understand. I don't want to get off track, but I'm interested in education, the role of religion in education. Do you think, are you arguing that schools should be teaching, some would say indoctrinating their students in atheism, in secular humanism?
Well, I just think we have to be honest about what we know about the world. And we know that we have many books on the shelves, and we teach some as fact and some as literature, as mere literature. And I think any rational appraisal of books like the Bible and the Quran, apart from some of the historical value that they offer, would consign them to the shelf of literature. I mean, these are books very much like the Iliad and the Odyssey. So you can read the Iliad and the Odyssey and talk about the historical understanding of Troy and try to draw correlations between the contents of these books and events in history, and that's all legitimate to do. But basically, you are in the presence of literature when you're reading Homer. You are in the presence of literature when you're reading the Bible and the Quran. It's not to say that Jesus didn't exist or that Muhammad didn't exist, but these books are not perfectly clear prisms through which to look at the past, the present, and certainly they're not perfectly clear prisms through which to view the future. And yet they're read as such by many, many millions of Americans. And so our orientation toward these books has to change, and we do have to get to a day where kids are taught the Bible the way they now are taught the Iliad and the Odyssey, as literature, literature that can be just chock full of brilliant metaphors and useful insights into the human condition. The golden rule can be discussed as the greatest ethical aphorism we have ever come across. That's all totally legitimate to do, and yet this notion that some books have to be held aside as uniquely wise and beyond criticism, essentially, because they may have come from the creator of the universe, this notion has to be just fully eroded at some point in the near future, or we're just going to keep paying a really an intolerable price for it.
And you think the schools are one place for that notion to be attacked?
Yeah, I absolutely do, and I think the schools and in the press, I just think that the journalists really are on the front lines of this culture war, and it's time that they started asking impertinent and embarrassing questions of people who are certain that the book that they keep by their bed is the perfect word of the creator of the universe.
Sam, I know you have an interview in just a couple minutes. I want to ask you a couple quick questions before we finish up. You just mentioned the Bible is literature. It's the center of the Western literary tradition. Most English professors would hold it up as something everyone should read. Mm-hmm. A lot of religious liberals also agree with that. They are people who look at the Bible as kind of inspiration and its beautiful words, important for everyone to read, but they don't take it literally. You seem to have a problem even with that. You see religious liberals who don't take the Bible literally. Well, you don't see them as allies against fundamentalism, or at least that's what I get from you. Are you saying that religious liberals are part of the problem? Many of them seem just as offended by your attack against fundamentalists as the fundamentalists do, even though they don't themselves agree with the fundamentalists.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting paradox, really, because on one level, I'm conceding to the liberals and the moderates that their approach to religion is better than the approach of fundamentalists, and I'm certainly conceding that we need to find some way of moderating the fundamentalist religious discourse of our world. I mean, we want a billion Muslim moderates rather than a billion Muslim fundamentalists, and we have to find some way of getting there. But the problem is that moderates, by the way they talk about religion, by the way they insist that religious faith remain above criticism, they essentially give cover to fundamentalists. They tend not to be very honest, for instance, about where their moderation is coming from. I mean, it's not like reading the Bible more closely makes you a moderate Christian. It's not like all these moderates have